Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. And welcome everybody to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. How is everybody? I hope everybody's doing well, and it is a beautiful day, at least inside. It might not be beautiful where you are, but it doesn't matter because we have a very gifted man here that we're going to be talking to. He's got incredible energy. You'd think that he had the energy of a 15-year-old, and he's a little older than that. He's about 18, and so he's a reverend and a preacher. He's an author. He's got his current book out, is Power Praying, and we're going to talk about that and him and where he came from and all that kind of good stuff. And he was in Vancouver, British Columbia, and now he's way over in the cold and tundra place over there.
Actually, so, I'm further south than you are.
And you're still
I'm south of Windsor, Ontario, and you have to drive north to get across the Ambassador Bridge to go to Detroit.
And so you're still in Canada.
I'm the very southernmost tip of all things Canada, but 1/3 of the United States is north of me at this point in the game. So you have to drive north to get into the United States from this part of Canada.
Well, that's actually pretty cool for you.
How about that, eh? So the American drivers have to go north to get on the bridge and then come south. That's what they have to do because there's a turn in the river. You know, the river goes funny, and they built the bridge at the best, least expensive spot to do it, kind of thing. And as it turned out, the flat land on both of the sides of that were in this place where it was north in Detroit and south in Windsor. So that's what happened.
So do you get a lot of winter in the winter?
We don't get it. You know what? This is the second warmest place in Canada. The warmest is Vancouver. This is the second warmest. I think we had 3 days of snow this year. Just 3 days in this part.
So you're very much like Seattle.
Really, yes. Although we really do have 4 definitive seasons. You do feel a shift in the weather. Now we had that crazy weather pattern called La Nina or something like this. And so it made the weather a little warmer. But I've been here since 2015. And I think we've had, 10 days of snow total in all that time. So wow. It's not the grass is green and the trees are thick. When I lived in northern Alberta, the trees were skinny, and I wish that I could apply the same routine to myself. Move north, I get skinny. Move south, I get fat.
Well, I could kind of think that you are, and we all are. And I love your opinion on this. It's kind of one of my crazy opinions. Maybe it's how I justify the fact that I'm not as skinny as I could be too. And right. And that is that you were kind of born to be the person that you are. And sometimes that's how we look. And that's why a lot of people who go and do bypass surgery and all this kind of stuff, they lose a tremendous amount of weight, and most of them gain it right back.
Well, listen, I'm not a geneticist. If I told you, my answer would be purely conjecture.
Well, I'm not either, so it is purely conjecture.
Well, the reality is, I am thicker than I used to be, and I don't like it too much. But that's life, I do know that I should be exercising more than I do because it's just good for your health overall, good for your attitude, good for your sleeping at night, et cetera, et cetera. And what I do now, of course, is I write books and I sit in my computer, I do interviews, and I travel and teach. And so the exercise routine is not what it used to be. But I used to jog every day. I used to do all kinds of stuff like that. And there was a day. You know what? This is funny. When I went into the ministry, I had been working at a lumber yard. And I remember how it was like if I had to move product from one end of the lumber yard to the other, I'd pick up this heavy sack or I'd pick up this big board and I'd run across the lumber yard and drop the thing off. And then I got invited to do a walkathon for a fundraiser for something. It was 17 miles. I jog-trotted the 17 miles. A year later, I was serving a church in Alberta, and I got invited to go to the ordination of a clergy person down the road. And I jogged to get to the clergy person's thing, and I was out of breath. because the job had changed. I was moving product, which was heavy, helping customers, going back and forth across the yard. I was always constantly using my muscles and exercising and so on as part of the daily routine. But in the ministry, I mean, what do? You sit down, you write your sermon, you visit people, go to the hospital. You have tea and crumpets with the ladies auxiliary, you know, and then you go down the road, you you visit somebody else. So it's a whole different kind of life. And you have to be intentional about exercising when you're in that kind of a place.
Well, and I have the same problem is that, well, see, for me, I was an athlete when I was a kid and I was very strong and all that
Yep.
kind of stuff. But then I was playing basketball one day and I hurt my back and I had to have surgery on that to remove some discs. And then I was trying to get back into shape. And then my left hip went out and I had to have that replaced. And that was the end of that.
You know what? That's not just genetics. If you had to have discs removed, that's major. That's not genetics. That's altering your physical anatomy.
Yeah.
So I think your theory isn't quite correct.
Well, it's often my theories are not correct.
Oh, well, there you go.
But what do you do? Now, what ended you leaving Vancouver to go to where you are today?
Well, I was serving a church in Vancouver, but it was a small little church plant, and Vancouver is the most expensive city in my country and one of the most expensive on earth. And we were renting. It was a church plant. We had about 120 people there. My wife and I thought we were going to be there forever. The lead guy had actually hired me because he was about to retire. He wanted to train me up to become the leader of the church. And then he changed his mind. And my wife went through a terrible time giving birth to our son. And I knew I needed to provide. She was suffering from something called FSH muscular dystrophy.
Oh,
and
sorry.
when she had our son, the effect of the dystrophy accelerated rapidly, and it was a hard pregnancy. And so she lost a lot of ground. Actually, what I'm just telling you is part of my healing prayer book, part of the story that's attached to the healing prayer book. And so I should tell you this part of the story because it's really amazing. So my healing prayer book has 5 pathways to a remedy. And one is the instant heal, one is pathway to a remedy, one is natural healing, one is bearing with suffering, and the last is passing through the gates of death to life. And all of those are wrapped around this thing called purpose as part of your podcast. But anyway, I was serving in this church, and you know, we got pregnant 2 years after we got married. It was really a delightful thing, and we did what every family does. You know, you paint the little room, you know, and you get your crib ready. you buy all the products that you need to buy. Family starts calling, friends starts calling, and there's little parties, you know, and all that kind of thing. But it was it was interesting. My wife began to develop some really serious issues. She got jaundiced, and she became very itchy. And so it was early, and it was like the first or second trimester when this stuff began to manifest. She went to see a skin doctor, dermatologist, and he looked at her and he wouldn't let her go home, took her into the hospital, and she had extreme cholestasis of pregnancy. And as it turned out in her case, her liver began to systematically destroy itself as estrogen levels would rise with the advance of the pregnancy. And so, oh man, healthy woman who's struggling with mild effects of FSH muscular dystrophy becomes severe. She has trouble even being able to get up in the morning. Her eyes become quite green and brown and that kind of thing. And her skin becomes quite pale. And actually, it was at the point where the medical team looked us in the eye and said, "You can't go whole term, you'll die. And the child might die." And my wife, it's one thing, listen, it's one thing for a guy to say he's pro-life. It's another thing for a girl to say she's pro-life, especially when she's in a situation like that. And she was and is someone who believes that life begins at conception in the womb. And so she said to the doc, "I will not kill my baby." I mean, this is the way she talked. And oh, man, you know, when you're face to face with losing one or both, the way you view life becomes very different. We went from everything was, you know, marvelous and wonderful. And if you want to use the old phrase, everything was tickety-boo. And it went to being, I don't know if she's going to make it. I might have a handicapped son. I might have a handicapped wife. Actually, when they did an amniocentesis on her, the fluid came out dark green. They could not tell if he was properly developed, but he was swimming in poison. And they said to us, it's most likely he'll be a pound when he's born. He's going to be muscular. He'll be, what do you call that? Where your brain is, I'm not remembering the word. Anyway, with the brain, the skull case presses in and you get these effects. What's it called? David, it's part of the story. I have to remember this. I don't remember this. I can't tell you the rest of the story. Cerebral palsy, that's it. Cerebral palsy, blind and deaf. That's what they said. Cerebral palsy, blind and deaf. And I thought, oh. So I was serving as a half-time associate at this church in Vancouver that was a church plant with a Salvation Army officer who'd done a church plant. And I was working with him. I was finishing up my master's degree. I got my master's degree done, and I needed to find work that was full-time, and that church could not afford to pay me a full-time wage. And the lead guy there was not going to retire. He changed his mind because he wanted to keep working, which means that I had to find a church. And so I began this crazy search for a church. And here's what happened. He went on sabbatical to pray about whether or not he was supposed to stay or go. I was in charge of the congregation and my wife was sick. And all that happened at the same time. And you got to know, it was not exactly the best of circumstances.
Oh, no.
It was tough. Anyway, I was giving care to people in the church, but I had to spend significant chunks of time. All my extra time was involved in making sure that my wife was going to be okay, and she wasn't doing well. And she had a wonderful medical team working with her. Healthcare in Canada doesn't cost us anything. But if it had been in the US, it would have been like $100,000 a day. That's the kind of care she was getting with a team of people in the special care nursery and perinatology in advance of that, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of work. Anyway, here's what happened. I made application to a church in southwestern Ontario, but her liver enzyme levels were extremely high. And it was not safe to leave her when the enzyme levels were extremely high. There was a Chinese lady who walked into one of the nurses on staff, and she snuck in at night during one of those watches of the night, and she said, "You're really sick." My wife said, "Yes, I am." The Chinese lady said, "Here is a formula for Chinese herbal tea for liver. Do not tell the medical team that you that I gave this to you. Just try it." And said they won't fight you if you do a home remedy. They'll fight you if I tell you it's a home remedy. But my parents used this and it improved their livers considerably. So we had a great friend named Margot. She went down to this Chinese section in Vancouver. It's a great big Chinatown down there. She got all these rare things that she put together in a concoction, and she gave it to my wife. And believe it or not, the liver enzyme levels came down to high normal while she took that tea. And so the church that was interested in me in Southwest Ontario said, "We'll fly you in over this weekend." And my friend Margot stayed with my wife during that time. That she's friends right to this very day. And here's what happened. The doc looked at me and said, "She can't go full term. The child is now 31 weeks. At 32 weeks gestation, his lungs should be properly developed, but we don't know if that's going to be so. We just don't know." And the test that we did with the amnio, the paper that we used to test it burned up because of all the bilirubin inside the amniocentesis and the fluid. So we're shooting in the dark here. We don't know if he's going to be viable or not. And so he said, "There's two things we can do. We can do a C-section, or we can put her on the drip, and in 3 days, the child will pass through the uterine canal, and that would kickstart the lungs." And this was before surfactant. At that point was what was called an experimental medication. It was around, but it was only around in a couple of hospitals. They were testing it. It was a Japanese medication that they used to spray on lungs to turn them from hard to soft. It had just been developed in Japan, and there were a few teaching hospitals in the US and Canada that were testing it. At that point in the game, it was not a common thing. And so if the lungs got hard, he'd be in an iron lung 2 months before he was supposed to be born. That's a very serious thing. So I had to provide. So here's what happened. Margot came, the enzyme levels were high normal. I flew across the country to this church in Southwest Ontario. And we had our candidation night, and wasn't this nice, and then we had another, and then they said to me, "It's Sunday evening, Monday, you have the morning off. You're 3 hours different in time. So sleep in a little bit, have a time of reflection and prayer to see whether or not you believe you're a match here. And then Bob here, he's going to pick you up. He's going to drive you around town. We'll have another interview Monday night." I said, "Okay, thank you very much." And now it was late July, early August, somewhere in that range, late July. And ordinarily down here at that time of the year, it's 95 Fahrenheit. That's the temperature that you get down this way.
Yep.
And so you put your short sleeve shirt on, you put your shorts on, and if it's not politically appropriate, you put your long pants on under great protest. So we all had these. So this guy, Bob, comes to pick me up, and the temperature dropped from 95 to 65. And he looked at me and he said, "David, it's cold. there was some sort of a weather pattern coming through. It's cold. And so can I stop at my house and get myself a long sleeve shirt and a sweater? I said, sure, come on, let's do it. So he drives up to his house. He invites me in. And I sit down in the living room, and there's a coffee table beside the chair that I'm in. There is an open form letter from a medical association with 2 paragraphs in it talking about the effect of the uterine drip on 31 to 32-week-old premature babes who are male. And there were 2 solutions. One was to put the woman on the drip, and after 3 days, the child would pass through the uterine canal and it would kickstart the lungs. And the other was to do a C-section. And the benefit of the C-section is that the child comes out intact, but you don't know what the lungs are going to be like. And then the article, in 2 paragraphs, the article said there's only one problem with the uterine drip thing. Because the skull case is not as strongly formed as it might be, there's a 35 to 40% higher incidence of cerebral palsy in male premature 32-week-old babies as they pass through the birth canal. Now, what are the odds that I should fly from Vancouver to Southwest Ontario, that's 3,000 miles, show up in a church where a guy needs to change his shirt? I am dealing with a 31 to 32-week-old premature babe coming through the uterine canal, and there is 2 paragraphs from a medical association and a form letter next to me. So I read these 2 paragraphs. I nod my head. Bob gets his long sleeve shirt on. I get my tour. The candidation went well, and in fact, they called me to come to that church. And so I moved to Southwest Ontario because it was a lead pastor position, and they pay better than the associate. It was a full-time role, not a half-time role. I would be able to care for my wife and my son, and no matter what happened, that kind of thing. And I fly back, and I get in the car, and I drove straight to the hospital. And I walk into the room, and everybody's there. There's 9 physicians in the room, 1 perinatologist, 1 high-end hematologist, and all the rest of these guys who were part of this teaching hospital in Vancouver. It was Vancouver Grace Hospital. So if your people in Seattle want to find out about it, it's one of the best in Canada. So anyway, I'm there, and I'm in this spot. And the doc walks in and says, we've been waiting for you. We have to get you, both of you, your consent to proceed. We believe that the best route is to put your wife on the uterine drip. In 3 days' time, the child will pass through the birth canal, and then it will kickstart his lungs. We don't know what his lungs are like. This is what we think is our best shot. Do you have any questions? And then I said, I only have one. Is it not true that there is a 35 to 40% higher incidence of cerebral palsy in 31 to 32-week-old male premature babes who pass through the birth canal because the skull case is not yet properly formed and the pressure presses down on the brain? And everybody in the room looked shocked. Kevin, I sounded so smart. Like I'd read every book on the shelf, like I had digested 5,000 volumes on premature babes, that kind of thing. Oh, and I read 2 paragraphs in a form letter in a coffee in somebody's house across the country. And so they looked at me and they said, we don't know what to say. And every one of those 9 doctors left the room. And so they said, we'll come back when we'd figure this out. And 5 hours later, one doctor, the main doctor who was leading the team, came back. And you got to know something. My wife always said the guy should have been on the cover of GQ. The guy had perfectly coiffured hair. He was a knockout of a man. And all those pregnant women in trouble liked him because he looked good, right? But here's what happened. He walked back into the room and he said, there will be a C-section next Tuesday. Now, I can't prove this, but when my son was born, he wasn't a pound. He was 4 pounds, 5 ounces, which is still small, but it's more than valuable. He was swimming in bilirubin and poison, and he came out and his eyes were clear and his head was not damaged. There's no part of his body that was impaired in any way, shape, or form. We were wondering why there was no miracle when he was in the womb, but we had women praying for my wife that the child would be spared and spared beautifully. And all of the medical effects that they were afraid of did not come to pass. And we did his wedding just about last May, coming up on the 1st year anniversary of his wedding. And he just got connected. But the point here is, I do believe that there's something called a pathway to a remedy. And this is a good way to start this conversation. My wife and I were guided. And you got to know, it wasn't what I didn't have a dream in the night where the angel spoke to me. Now, I wouldn't have minded that. But the point, I had to make the decision to travel across the country, used Chinese herbal medicine to bring my wife's liver enzyme levels down to a manageable level so that she could survive and do this. Although it only worked for about 2 weeks, and that was the duration of what I had to do to get to that candidation across the country. Then by divine appointment, I met a guy who needed to change his shirt, who had an open form letter on a coffee table beside me when I was praying to the Lord about what I was supposed to do for my wife and my future son.
Did you ever ask him why he had that form letter sitting on his?
Yeah, it was a volunteer association, a medical thing, and they used to contribute to it. And they got a monthly newsletter. And once a month there'd be one of these things, and he'd open up the letter and read it, and and then he'd pass it to his wife. He had read it, but his wife hadn't yet. So he opened the letter, left it there. His name was Bob Dodge, and his wife Joyce. He's passed on. In those days, he was like in his 60s, and I was in my 30s. So he's gone on to his reward. But his wife is still alive. I just saw her about 2 years ago, and I said, that was a miracle. And she said, yes, it was. Yeah, that whole thing was just a miraculous chain of events. So one of the things I teach in the Healing Prayer Book, and that story's in there, is that medicine and miracle are not separated from each other, but they intertwine, and that guidance is given. And it's not a wrong thing for somebody who is a believer to try to access everything they can that's available in the medical community. Now, there's more to the story, because my wife did have muscular dystrophy, and she lost a lot of ground with the birth of that child. And so her family line, her mother, her sister, and her niece are all afflicted with that. Another sister, she had escaped this because of the genetic slam dunk was cleared the one sister, but the other two, and her mom, all had this thing called FSH, muscular dystrophy. Actually, right now in the US, the founder of Lululemon, I can't remember his name, but he's a Canadian guy who founded that company in the US. He has been afflicted with FSH, muscular dystrophy, the same syndrome that my wife and my sister-in-law, my mother-in-law, and so on have had. And here's the effects of it. Your face sags, your muscles don't work right. You get dizzy between 16 and 20. Your shoulder blades go out of position. Your spine gets crooked. Your shoulder blades get rounded. If you damage a muscle, it never comes back. And you lose your mobility with the advance of years, and it's a plateau decline disease. You'll have a sudden drop, then you'll plateau for a season, then you'll have another sudden drop, then you'll plateau for a season, and you wind up in a wheelchair. That's what happens. You don't die young, but you die in a wheelchair, and you lose your mobility, and you have difficulty standing and walking. And right now, the reports of that founder from Lululemon is he's having trouble walking and going upstairs. Same trajectory. Can't lift his arms higher than his shoulders, because that's the trajectory of the disease. So here's what happens. In the course of time, the church that I'm serving, and now after that was in Alberta, and there was a reason for that move too. But regardless of that, I was serving in Alberta, and that congregation was a very sizable one. It was about 1,200 people, and it was a very, very, very strong, other-centered, compassionate congregation. One of the things it wanted to do was to help the persecuted and the poor church. And so we got an invite from 2 American congregations to go overseas to Uganda, to help northern Uganda build after that area had been ravaged by Joseph Kony and Idi Amin. Now, I don't want to tell you the horror stories that are attached to this. I will tell you that when I landed there, I met people whose hands were cut off, whose tongues were cut out, whose noses were cut off, and so on and so forth. They had suffered immensely. Kony lost, and in the course of time, he wound up being kicked out of the country. They didn't execute him. They almost did. But he escaped and wound up somewhere in Sudan somewhere. I think he's in Darfur, but nobody knows for sure. Or he's in the jungles of DR Congo. Regardless of that, he's no longer in Uganda. And my church made a decision to help with two or three different emphases. One was to train the pastors and leaders, because they hadn't had an education for 20 years. So if you were in one of those towns in the north, you didn't get to school. You didn't get medical care. You didn't learn how to do social skills, because there was no school system. And Kony would show up and ravage the town, and brothers and sisters would war with each other, and this kind of crazy thing. Anyway, bottom line was, if you could read, you could become the mayor. If you could read, you become the town elder. If you could read, you'd become the school teacher, even if your skill was low. And so the intent behind this was that my church would go there and train the pastors and do a build project or two, and then take part in whatever kind of thing they wanted us to do. And actually, I wrote this book because of that. The reason for this book was to create a training manual for the pastors in Uganda. That's why I wrote this. I wasn't trying to become a published author. So here's what happened. We go there, and it cost us a lot of money. We spent about $500,000 over the 3 years that I did that. because there were 750 to 1,000 pastors at each of these cohorts, and we did it 3 times. And so we'd pay for their supper, we'd pay for their breakfast, we would pay for their accommodation, we would pay for their school, we would give them books, we would just give them pens and paper and pencils and books and those kinds of things. And we paid the travel expenses to and from. And so, the church elders looked at me and said, "That's a lot of money." I said, "Yeah."
You were doing some really good things over
Well,
there.
yes, it would. No, nobody disputed that. What they wanted to do, though, is they wanted to meet the guy, right? So in the course of time, we flew in the overseeing guy who had got all this stuff done. He called himself a bishop. He had planted 48 churches after the madness, but they were pretty poor and they didn't have resources, didn't have education. I met him when I was in Atlanta with 2 other American pastors, and the 3 of us made this decision to do this. And so our 3 churches did it. So we went, and we saw amazing and wonderful things. And then we flew him in to my congregation, Spruce Grove Alliance Church, in 2009. Now, remember, my wife is afflicted with FSH muscular dystrophy. She's walking with canes now. She can't lift her arms above her head. But I'll just tell you what happened to the church. So we had 3 services. We had a Saturday night, and it was the smallest one. We had a 9:15, and that was kind of the conservative, stiff one. And then we had an 11 o'clock where they were dancing and boogieing, that kind of thing. So, by the way, I could do all 3. So here's what happens. By the way, I can be stiff and liturgical if you want me to, and I can, do the Pentecostal polka if you want me to. So, I'm doing all 3 of these services, and we bring the guy into the Saturday night, and he's telling these deliverance from death stories where somebody's praying and somebody's life is spared, that kind of thing. He's talking about the defeat of Joseph Kony's army and the prayer warriors who were praying and the 300,000 people who'd gathered, and everybody was on the edge of their seats with these amazing stories. So they walked up to me and him and they said, "Tell different stories tomorrow morning. We're coming back." So the Saturday nighters all texted their friends, and then more of them showed up for the 9:15 service, which was usually about 3/4 full. In this case, it was jammed. It was full right up to capacity. And then the 9:15ers, they were so excited by this, they went to the 11 o'clock, which is our full service. So it was standing room only, right back into the overflow and into the gym and into the hallway. We had people lined up against the walls, sitting down in the aisles. I had to sit on the seat, on the steps next to the pulpit because there were no seat left for me. Now, my wife was sitting 2 or 3 from the front in her usual spot. We always sat in the same place, so our family had a regular kind of spot, right? Anyway, he starts to preach and he's telling these amazing stories. And you know how stories work. You tell the plot, and then there is the climax at the end when there's a turn of events. And he's telling the plot, and he's about to get to the climax of one of these deliverance from death stories when he stops. And he looks at me, and he speaks with his thick Ugandan accent. And he said, David, what is M.A.? I looked at him. I thought, M.A. Master of Arts? I don't know. So I said that. This is, by the way, this is captured on a CD. In those days, we recorded on CDs. And then he said, no, I've got something wrong. Something's terribly wrong. And he puts his head on the pulpit and starts to pray in the middle of his war story, but doesn't have an ending yet. Of course, everybody's hanging on what he's trying to say about the war story. And then he looks up and he says this: it's a wasting muscle disease. It starts in your head and it goes down your neck and into your shoulders. Your shoulders get rounded. Your shoulder blades go out of position between 16 and 20. You get chronic pain. Sometimes you get scoliosis. If you damage a muscle, it's gone forever. And he just gave up. It's a tribal from Africa. He gives me this perfect medical description of FSH muscular dystrophy. And then he said this: whoever has this, Jesus has just healed you. And I'm looking at my wife and her arms go above her head for the first time in decades. Her friends and I are staring at her. She is utterly unconscious to the fact that her arms are raised because she wants to praise God. That's what she's doing. And she doesn't even know she's done it. But all the pain in her body vanished. And I looked at her and here's what happened. We had guests who'd come from Vancouver, our old friends in Vancouver, Margot and Oscar, that couple who sat with my wife. They came because they were thinking about traveling to Uganda with us. They wanted to hear the guy and find out whether or not he was somebody they could follow and work with. And so they were staying in our home together with some other people. And the plan was we would go home and I was to go on the top shelves and get down the heavy pots and pans that my wife couldn't manage because her arms wouldn't go up there. She pushed me out of the way. She stood on those steps, perfect balance, took down the heavy pots and pans and cooked for our guests. It was the most incredible, astonishing thing. So we had a medical doctor who had known us at that point for 5 years and had been treating her to give, aid and help and, adaptations to whatever she could, because there's no cure for FSH muscular dystrophy. The Lululemon guy just gave $100 million gift to Muscular Dystrophy Association America so that he could target research on FSH because he wants it cured because he's ill. He's not in a good way. But regardless of this, at this point, and even now, there was no cure for FSH muscular dystrophy. And all we
David, I'm gonna stop you right there because I need to get in a. I could just wind you up and let you go for hours.
I haven't finished the end of the story, but you have a commercial.
I know we're gonna take a break right now, and you're gonna finish the story right when we come back. It's just gonna be a minute and 10 seconds. So,
sure, sounds good.
So everybody, stay right with us. You're listening to Positive Talk on the Brushwood Media Network.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
As you go about your daily life, look closer. As you gather with family and friends who love and support you, look closer. There are youth right in your community who don't have the home, warmth, and healing you have. So look closer. Every year across America, a staggering 4.2 million youth are homeless or trafficked. And for 50 years, Covenant House has worked relentlessly to keep them safe and protected. Tonight, 2,000 young people will sleep safely in a Covenant House bed. And tomorrow, they will wake up surrounded by love. They get clean clothes, hot meals, medical care, and a safe place to sleep. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In sites across America to help them fulfill the great promise of their lives. So look closer at Covenant House. To help or get help, go to covenanthouse.org.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. We've got Dr. David Chotka with us today, and he is a minister. He's an author. He's got some incredible stories, I do have to say, about healing and healing prayer. And we're going to continue with that right now because we're in the middle of the story.
Yes.
About, at this point, your wife, who is afflicted with this terrible disease, is now cooking dinner for your guests and everybody, and is doing just great.
Yes, she is. So of course, the fear is that it's placebo effect. It's not going to last, that kind of thing. So you watch it. And we had a doctor who had known us at that point for 5 years. And he was a teaching doctor attached to a teaching hospital. So this is one of the fine ones. And so the University of Alberta Medical Heart, it's one of the heart transplant specialist hospitals in all of Canada. It's one of the best. Anyway, he was teaching students from that place and training them, etc. And so he watched us, and he had been doing what I call adaptive therapies for her for 5 years. So he knew her well. He knew me well. He knew the whole family well. That was our doctor. He saw the effect. And he waited 3 years. And then he wrote the doctor's note. All traces of FSH muscular dystrophy have vanished from this woman's body. This is beyond medicine. That's what he wrote in the doctor's note. I can send you a copy of that note if you'd like to see it. But
no, I believe you.
Well, it was just the most amazing thing. So there was a funny kind of application here about a week after this. So I have 2 kids, and I got my daughter, I got my son. My son is 5.5 years older than my daughter. And they were inseparable at this point in the game. There have been seasons where that's not true. But at this point in the game, they are. So, my daughter, who's usually very sweet and very kind and very gentle and other-centered, decided that she was going to push every emotional button that my son had at breakfast. So she's doing this. He's being valiant, trying his best not to treat his sister poorly, and he's beginning to get to the stage where it's a little bit too much. I'm just about to discipline my daughter when suddenly my wife had enough. And she said, Jessica Chotka, that's enough. And she raised her hands and went like this, and then she grabbed her by the hand, stomped her foot, ran her up the stairs, knelt down beside her bed to make her pick up all her toys and make her bed, raced her into the bathroom to brush her teeth, and ran her down the stairs and got her in the van and drove her to school. And we were so mad at Jessica. We didn't realize she ran up the stairs. She knelt down beside the bed to pick up the toys and got her to make the bed. Got up unaided, went to the bathroom, ran down the stairs, put her in the car, and drove back and forth to school. Not a trace of pain, not a trace of the syndrome. It was all gone. So this amazing thing just fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life. I used to have to go to the other side of the bed. She would put her arms around my neck, and I'd have to pick her up to get her out of bed to take her to the shower so she could have a hot shower. We're going to buy a 1-floor home because that was what the trajectory was. We were in a 2-story at that point. And that became totally unnecessary. Now, I'll just tell you this. I hate gardening. My wife loves it. So she was making me do that garden stuff. I didn't want to do it. But out of care and love for my wife, I would do this with great reluctance. And she returned to gardening with joy because she could. And the Lord healed her. And so these 2 stories actually illustrate what I want to say in the Healing Prayer Book, that pathway to a remedy is a marvelous thing. And it's not to be denigrated. It's not to be treated with contempt. It's not a lesser kind of faith. It's reality. And so if somebody's done 20, 25 years of research and they've produced some medical wisdom or some approach or an adaptive therapy or a cure, for heaven's sake, take the gift. That's from God. Some people have been researching that issue for 20 years because their next door neighbor died of that thing, or their kid's sister died of that affliction, or whatever. They've done this because they want to make a positive contribution and make the world a better place. Accept that gift. And oh, by the way, there's this instant heal thing that happens from time to time too. And by the way, there's this thing called divine appointment where you wind up beside information that you couldn't possibly know. I mean, I flew through 3,000 miles across the country from Vancouver to Chatham, Ontario, and wound up in somebody's living room because he wanted to change his shirt because the weather changed. I mean, we're talking, that's ridiculous. It's just absurd.
No, it happens though. It happens all the time.
Yes, it does.
The difference in many cases is you recognized it. And you recognized each thing that was happening as it was happening.
And it was divine. In both cases, it was divine guidance. Huh?
And in a lot of people, they say, "Oh no, that's just a coincidence."
Well, again, this is the issue. So I've written 5 books. One of them is paying attention to the signals when God speaks. And when I tell a story like this, or any other kind of story that has to do with guidance, in a church workshop or an event or something like this, people will sneak up to me after the event is over, look in all directions, and they'll say, "Do you mean when this happened to me in 1987? And I discovered this thing was happening, and I don't know how it happened. That was God." I said, "Yeah." They'll go, "Oh, you mean I hear the voice too?" I said, "Yeah, you do." And by the way, the Lord is not restricted to what you believe or what you're doing or whether you're a sinner or whether you're righteous. God can talk to anybody he wants to, anytime he wants to. Mm-hmm. And that's what I see. That, by the way, I see that in Scripture. There's a spot there where God talks to a donkey because the guy didn't get it. Balaam's donkey. So Balaam, the sorcerer, didn't know there was an angel with a bad sword there ready to kill him. The donkey gets the ground, and the donkey hears the voice. So I mean, there's a scene where the enemies of Israel, the king of Nineveh, hears the voice and makes the whole city repent. And there's another scene where Cyrus of Persia, the conqueror, hears God tell him to build a temple for the Jews because they didn't have one. I mean, they were not God-fearers and they didn't like Judaism. And God spoke to them. So, I mean, who are we to say that God can't communicate to anybody anytime he wants to?
Now, David, I've got to get this in because there are people that are going, "Well, now, David."
Yes, I know.
And now, my brother, who was a evangelical Christian,
okay,
he was very, very quote unquote strong in his faith.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm not in his heart. Couldn't tell you. I know he did some things that probably he wouldn't have done well in any event. He got lung cancer.
Okay.
And stage 4 lung cancer. And so what he decided was this. He was going to pray it away. And then he was going to go take a little bit of money and get into a van, and then he was going to go around the country talking about his miraculous healing. Well,
As it turned out, he died, right? Is that what
he
happened to him?
died 3.5 years ago.
Yeah, you know what? There's pitfalls to avoid here. I have to just, with all the tenderness and love, I'm so sorry about your brother. I lost my brother young too, so I just want to be clear here. He was dead at 39, and so man, that does change. I don't know how old your brother was when this happened to him.
He was 64.
Okay, well, he's had a little more of life than my brother did, but the point is, any death is painful. Any death, especially where you think God's going to do something and something else happens. So we have a chapter where we talk about pitfalls to avoid. And one of them is the one you just named. You don't go around throwing out medicine in the name of miracle when you don't know the miracle has actually happened. And medicine and miracle intertwine. In fact, I have a chapter called Medicine, Miracle, Mystery. Talk about the intertwining of these three things. And it's straight up, many are the people who can tell me a parallel story to the one you just said, where some loved one, I had a cousin named Maria, and she did the same thing. She had cancer. She said, I'm not going to get the treatment. Jesus is going to heal me. And she wound up dying of cancer, and she was only 50. And lovely, kind, sweet lady. She's one of the, my cousin would show up at my parents' home to cut their grass because they couldn't do it when they got older. And I was an hour and a half away. That's the kind of person she was, sweet and unpretentious and gentle and kind. And she died young. And she died young, believing that Jesus was going to heal her. And she did not avail herself of what was before her. And so I don't think that's called wisdom. I think you should be. So here's the point. Medicine works on cause and effect. And so the researchers do this. They see a trajectory with a particular affliction. They put together a hypothesis about what might happen. They test the hypothesis. And over years, they test out whether or not treatment cures this or it alleviates this or whatever. And they do this cause and effect thing until they come to a diagnosis and a cure. And that's called scientific enterprise, and it's rooted in cause and effect. Miracle is miraculous intervention where God intervenes in the flow of time and space and causes things that are not ordinary to happen. And that occurs from time to time. And sometimes God says, you need a pathway to a remedy. And if I hadn't taken that, my wife would have been dead. But there, she would have died. My son would have died. I would have been bereaved of both in one fell swoop 2.5 years after I got married. That would have been a terrible blow. Instead, God guided us to go to that place. And we asked for the miracle. And it wasn't until years later that we realized he was born without cerebral palsy. He was not born blind or deaf. He had no muscle damage. He had no mental affliction. He came out. He was 4 pounds instead of the 1 pound they were expecting. And he was swimming in poison for months. That does not make sense. So the miracle did happen, but it sure wasn't the one we wanted,
Well, you remember that old parable, and I'm not sure where it comes from, author unknown probably, about a man that was caught in a flood, and the flood was going up and going up and going up. So he gets on the roof and he prays to God. He says, God, save me from this. I don't want to drown. I want you to provide me with divine healing or divine awareness. And so boat comes up and he says, come on, get in. And he said, no, I'm fine. God's gonna take care of this for me. And then a helicopter comes by and drops the ladder, and the guy says, no, don't worry about it. God's gonna take care of me. Well, the waters rose and the man drowned, and he goes to heaven. And he said, why didn't you save me? I thought I was there. And he said, I sent a boat for you and a helicopter. What else do you want?
Actually, the better version is the one where he gets a 4x4, then he gets the boat, then he gets that. It's an old preacher joke.
Is that what it is?
I've used the preacher joke many a time. I've done it. If you change churches, you can use the same joke again.
So, but the thing is that I think that in many cases, and I believe in divine healing.
Yep.
I also, from my world, that also includes Reiki. It includes acupuncture, and different things that involve energy around the body, and that's
Well, my
stuff like
son
that.
received acupuncture all the time when he had constant colds, and the only thing that fixed him was this chiropractor who gave him acupuncture. And
Yeah.
so I mean, listen, for the record, there's lots of pathways to healing here. In my case, I do believe in miraculous healing that comes from Jesus of Nazareth, and that's what the scripture says. And so, but I have to tell you how I fell into this, because that's the funny part of the story. How much time we got? We got.
We got well, tell you what, before you do that, let me take this real quick 30-second break, and then we'll come right back, and then we'll have 15 minutes.
Okay, that's good. That would tell me to do this. Yeah.
14 minutes. So you're listening to Positive Talk. We're going to do this real quick, and then we'll be right back.
A lifetime of savings can disappear overnight. Millions of dollars are stolen every day from unsuspecting older adults by family members, caregivers, and trusted professionals. If you suspect financial exploitation, call the Elder Care Locator at 1-800-677-1116 or go online to the National Adult Protective Services Association to be connected with help in your area.
And welcome back to Positive Talk. By the way, we're talking with David Chotka. Go to his website, which is spiritequip.com, and you can find out all about him. You can buy his books, find out that he's got blogs, he's got videos. He's a busy man, and you just wind him up and he goes. So I'm going to wind him up, and here he goes. David, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So I want to tell you how I wound up tripping into prayer for healing, because I'll just tell you something. It wasn't a common thing in the denomination I grew up in. It just wasn't ordinary. And I remember I went to seminary, and there's a whole story about how I went to that seminary. But as it turned out, there was a mixed kind of faculty there. Some of them were what I call supernaturalists. Some of them were anti-supernaturalists. Some of them are what you call cessationists. God don't do that anymore, but he used to. And there was this mix of faculty in that place. Anyway, here's what happened. I remember going into a class once, and it was my first year, and there was a fresh cohort of about 30 students, and all of us were, green as green could be, trying to learn how to do this kind of thing. And we're all in the same, we have 3 classes in common, we get 2 electives. So I go into one of these classes, and one of the profs says, we know that Jesus didn't walk on water. I said, now, wait a minute. I think that the miracles that are described in the New Testament are accurate. I do believe this is true. And in the class, there was a world-class professional jokester. So he had been a radio commentator on one of these talk radio shows, and he would just dish it back as fast as you could hand it out. And he had 2 things. He had the look, the old Jack Benny look, where he could look at you and make you laugh, Yeah. And he had that ability with the quick wit to be able to make the whole room explode with derisive laughter. It was just, in fact, sometimes the jokes he told were so funny we'd laugh until it hurt. We'd cry and laugh, that kind of thing. So the class liked him, Anyway, I tell this thing about Jesus walking on water, and he cracks a joke in the middle of the room. The room explodes with laughter, but I was the object of the humor, because I actually believe, I was a brain dead idiot who believed that Jesus actually walked on water. So anyway, you laugh it off the first time, and the second time, and the third time. And this happened every time I was in a class where I would defend the historicity or the authority of the scripture. And there was all kinds of these conversations happening all the time, because all of us were navigating, figuring out what we believed and how we believed, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the point is, after about 2 months of this, there came this moment where I said, yep, I'm never going to be his friend. So I had a class that was 3 times a week. I was New Testament Greek. I had to cross the plaza to get to that class. So I'm on the plaza. I'm walking on, and one of my classmates, and I call her Susie in the book. I don't have her permission to use her name. I've lost touch with her, but I call her Susie. Anyway, she stops me and she says, hey, David, how you doing? And this was a very fine, wonderful person. One of those do unto others you would have them do unto you kind of people. So I said, oh, Susan, I'm good. How about you? She said, well, I'm really good. You see that hospital 6 blocks down the road, the University Hospital there? I said, yeah. She said, well, the comedian, he's in there. You know what, Kevin? I didn't feel bad.
Oh, now,
no,
come on.
No. I had to repent on the spot. I had to say, oh, David Chotka, that's bad thinking. So I said,
I don't like him. Oh, Lord, thank you. I'm sorry. I hate him, but I'm sorry. I've sinned again.
Anyway, I did that quickly inside she didn't see that. It was what I felt. But anyway, yeah. I said to her, well, listen, is he getting good care? And she said, yeah, he's in the University Hospital just 6 blocks down there. I said, what's wrong? And she said, he has phlebitis. Now, for your listeners, I'll just explain that. It's a clot or an embolism in your arm or your leg, a vein or something. And if the clot is big, it's big trouble. If the clot starts to break free, it's even bigger trouble. If the clot breaks free, It travels through your bloodstream, and it comes to 1 to 3 places. Either lands in your heart, your lung, or your brain. If it goes to any one of those 3, 95 times out of 100, you're dead. It's very, very serious. And in those days, they didn't have the treatments they have now. And so they had to be gingerly treating this guy and giving him measured doses of anticoagulants to get that thing so it would just come a little bit loose, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I said, oh, that's terrible. I'm so sorry. And she said, yeah, he's in a bad way. And I said, oh, okay, well, have you gone to visit him? She said, yeah. I said, okay, I have to go to my class now. She said, wait, he's asked me to ask you something. I said, what's that? She said, he wants you to come and pray for his healing. I said, what? Every single time I've tried to say anything about Jesus being the healer, he has gone after me, and he's made me a laughing stock to our peers. He's made fun of us. He's pointed the finger at me and said that I was an idiot. He's used humor to cause the room to laugh. He's been cruel. And she stopped and she said, he has been cruel. Now, she was someone who never talked that way. She was one of these people who would have find it hard to say a bad word about the devil. Anyway, sweet kind of other-centered kind of person. She said, I will talk to him. I said, well, I'm not going. So I went to my class, and the next day I'm in the coffee lounge in the school. And she's there and I'm there. And she says, oh, did you go and see our friend? He's terribly sorry. He says he's terribly sorry. I said, well, I'm not going. And she said, why aren't you going? I said, because I don't know if I believe him. Now, there was another reason in the background. I had not met anybody healed by the prayer of faith. I had never been trained in the prayer of faith. I wasn't sure it was for today or not. I wasn't sure if that still happened, and I'd never done it before. So I'm greener than your average rookie is the best way to describe me at that point in the game. Just had no experience whatsoever. And he had made fun of me. So there was this fear of mockery too. And I had a track record of this guy not treating me well. And so I saw her the next day again after that, when I was walking across that same plaza, and she said to me, did you go? I said, no. And I don't know, Kevin, you ever been told off by your mom?
Oh.
She got the look. The fire out of the eyes and the stomp. So she's right there outside in front of all these people who are going across this plaza. She stomps her foot. She raises her voice. She looks me in the eye, and she says my name with my middle initial because she knew it. And she said, David R. Chotka, aren't you going around this school telling everybody the Bible is the word of God, needs to be obeyed? I said, yes. And she said, well, how about this scripture? I was sick and you visited me. I went, oh no. Oh no. I felt the fell blow landed in the belly, that kind of thing. And
she had you.
She had, out of sheer obedience to the Bible, was going to have to go, right? So I looked at her, I said, look, it says sick and visit. It doesn't say sick and prayed, because I didn't know what I was doing, right? She said, sick and visit, sick and prayed. I don't care, but he's asked you for you to go. You got to go. So I finished my class, and then I walked the 6 blocks. I went into the hospital. And it was serious. I walked in the room. He's white. He's 27 years old. He's white as a ghost. He's hooked up for sound with all these monitors. He's got tubes going into his body. And it's not good. You can see he's terrified. And I go in there. Kevin, I talked about the weather. So after I talked about the weather, I'd asked about his coursework because he had a pile of books on the dinner table, that kind of thing. He's trying to keep up with his work. And then I said, well, I visited you. I can go now. Sick and visited what's in my head here. And he said, wait. Aren't you going to pray? I said, listen, every single time I've said anything about this being true or for now, or even historical, you have made a mockery of me to our peers. Why, in the name of all that is holy, do you want me to pray for you? And then he burst into tears, and it was true sorrow. The guy just was crying to beat the band. He said, oh, I am so sorry I did that to you. I please forgive me. And then he said, I have phlebitis. I'm 27. I could die. I don't know if I'm going to live or die. Won't you please ask? You're the only guy I know who believes that every word of that Bible is true. Why don't you come over and pray for me that your Jesus might heal me? I thought, oh, what are you going to do? So it was obvious the guy was legitimate. He wasn't going to make fun of me, but I still didn't know what to do. I thought I'd never been trained. I didn't know. Anyway, the point was, I did remember in the Bible, Jesus put his hand on sick people. I thought, well, can I put my hand on you? I said, yes. I said, where's the phlebitis? He said, left arm, just above the elbow. So I went around the bed, came to his left side, put one hand over there, one hand on his head. And then, Kevin, I don't know what I said. It was a pathetic prayer. It was any kind of a prayer at all. I was
it didn't
so
matter what you
green.
said.
Right? What's that?
It didn't matter what you said.
Well, no, the point was I said something like, oh, God, help this guy. Something like that. Some crazy little piddly kind of prayer. And then I did start to say, oh, God, this man has phlebitis. Oh, Jesus, please. That much I remember, but that's all I remember. And then the strangest and most wonderful thing happened. It was like the atmosphere in the room changed. He felt it and I felt it at the same time. It was like the whole place filled with this sense of divine presence. And it was holy, and it was filled with compassion, and it was filled with love. And then I felt this fiery presence rising up inside me, right from the center of my being, right through my whole body. And it was I'll just try and describe it for you, but I don't know if I'm going to do a good job. It was a combination of fire and peace and focus. All I could see was him. That means focus and compassion and energy, divinely appointed energy that rose up inside of me. And then it flowed down from my arm and went into his arm. And then he said this. He said, what is that fiery presence coming into my arm? I said, that's Jesus' spirit. He's healing you. And I ran out of the room because I was terrified. I'd never felt anything like that before in my life. I'd never done anything like that before in my life. I didn't know what was going to happen to him. And I didn't know if he was going to make fun of me. So I raced out. And the next day, I'm in the coffee lounge of the school getting ready for my next class. And he's there. I said, you're here? He said, yes, I am. And he shoved me into a corner. It was one of those old stone 19th century buildings, had these little stone corners. And he looks in every direction, And then he says, that prayer changed my life. And I said, thank you. And I ran away. Because what he didn't know, the prayer changed my life too. But so here's what happened. The next class that I had with him, somebody said something that I had to say, wait a minute, take umbrage with that. And he got up and everybody was waiting for the joke to make fun of me. And he made fun of unbelief with the humor. And everybody in the room laughed at unbelief. And every time I was in a class with him, he defended my faith rather than attacked it from that point forward with the same humor gun. Now, I didn't know what this was about. The story I told you is in the book. This part's not in the book. I want to finish the story. So it would come in those days. The denomination sent us out for summer field training. So we would do a term from September to May, and then we go from May to August in some church somewhere. And those poor saints out there had to break the boy in. So and as I'm about to go, he shoves a piece of paper in my hand. He said, that's my phone number. If you're in trouble, you call me. I thought, okay. So I go off to my summer field, have a marvelous time. I learned all kinds of things because it was a great season of learning and fun. It was at rural Saskatchewan. And that's like rural North Dakota, all just honest farm folk. They just wanted somebody to show up and love on them. And that's what I did. And he'll come back to school and he races over to me when he sees me and he says, you didn't call me. I said, I didn't have any trouble. He said, you have trouble, you call me. Anyway, 2 months in, we have a party. The students are all gathered together and we're doing harmless, fun stuff, And I walk over and there's this girl, Susie, and there's this guy, and there's the man's wife. And they're all talking. We're shooting the breeze. We're laughing about sweet nothings, that kind of thing. It's a fun party. We're having just teasing each other. And the two girls start giving him the elbow. They said to him, you got to tell Chotka what happened. You got to tell Chotka what happened. He said, I don't want to tell Chotka what happened. So eventually he did. The day that I was there, I left and the nurse walked in, the charge nurse. And he said, I can go home now. Jesus has healed me. My friend from the Bible school, he came and prayed for me. They said, we don't do that around here. You have to run some tests. And he said, well, run them then. She said, well, I was just coming to get you. You're due. And so they rolled him down the hall and they ran the tests. And to their great amazement and astonishment, every trace of phlebitis was gone from his body. And the day before, there'd been a large clot. Every trace of it was gone. And so they released him. His wife came and picked him up. And of course, when they went home, they were thankful, very, very thankful. He could have died and now he's well. And so they kneel beside their bed to thank God for what had happened. And they went to bed. And in the night, he had a dream. And in the dream, he heard a voice. And the voice said, my servant David defends the integrity of my word. No one defends him. When he defends the integrity of my word, you defend him. And he did, right for 3 years of theological training. Anytime I'd say anything that had to do with the glory of Christ or the historicity of the scripture or whatever, he would rise to defend me with that humor gun of his. 30 years after it happened, 30 years, he wrote, I changed denominations, and he's still in the old one, but he wrote me a note, and he thanked me. He said, 30 years ago on this day, you prayed for my healing. The medical community didn't believe me, but I was well. Thank you for faithfully praying for me. So that started my journey. That story right there is the first story in the book. And the first part about him being healed, I didn't tell the rest of that. That's just for your podcast listeners and for your network, the Brushwood network there. But regardless of this, that began me trying to find out how to do this. And so what you have in the book is the distilled wisdom of 35 years of ministry, where I've been to hospitals, prayed with people and they died, and prayed with people and they got well. And pathway to a remedy, miraculous healings, holy mystery, where the answer didn't come. And my co-author, Maxie Dunham, is a very famous author. He's published 50 odd books, and he's well known in American Methodism, extremely well known. He was the head of the upper room, and I can't even believe he wanted to write with a guy like me. So he did, and I'm very thankful for that. But he's been a mentor. I've read 7 or 8 of his books, and all of them have helped me. And his name, of course, has much more traction in the U.S. than mine. I'm well known in my denomination in Canada, but not in your country. And he's well known in his. So the hope I have here is that people will listen to a podcast like this and consider purchasing it. And you can get it anywhere books are sold. You can get it at Books A Million. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it at Walmart if you want to. Or you can go online and order it. You'll find it. Just go Healing Prayer. It's a new title, 2021. It's got my name and Maxie Dunham's name on it. But what we do in the book is we tell stories like the ones I've told you. And of course, it includes medicine. It includes miraculous manifestations of power. It includes the combo where these two overlap. It includes partial healing and entire healing. And we name 5 pathways where people who are seeking healing get guided. Number 1 is the instant heal. And I just told you about my wife's instant heal. And I told you about my friend's instant heal at the school. The second is natural healing. Now, let me tell you this. But when my wife had muscular dystrophy, if she damaged a muscle, never healed, she'd lose it. After she was healed, the muscle tissue grew back. And she was healed in 2009. This is 2024. At the time of this recording, it's 20. So we're talking a decade and a half, almost 2 decades. She's growing muscle tissue. This is amazing. And so in my mind, even ordinary healing is miraculous. I knew her when she didn't have it. And then there's this pathway to a remedy, the story I told you about my wife and I being guided to that solution. And then there's holy mystery, where the suffering happens and we don't know why. And there's no good reason for it, but we're in the middle of it. And last of all, we have the miraculous crossing, where your time on earth is done and you pass over. And all these things intertwine. They all do. So medicine works this way, miracle works this way. Every now and then the 2 paths overlap, and sometimes they're in separate trajectories. But we're not supposed to fight any of that. Any kind of healing is God's healing. Any kind.
Even if it's your time to cross over.
Even if it's your time to cross over. In fact, I'll just tell you this. All of us are going to cross over. All of us are.
No.
Well, you might not think that way right now. You will sooner or later. So anyway, we all will. So my co-writer is 89. He's turning 90 in August. And now we're having talks about whether he can make it to this or that event that we want to do together, because he doesn't know. His health is failing. And he's a wonderful, wonderful, kind, other-centered, gentle Southern gentleman. Just one of these. He was a non-racist Southern gentleman who left his under his bishop because the guy was racist to go to another bishop because the guy was not. I mean, this is the principled kind of leadership he has. Anyway, wonderful, kind, sweet man. And we all know that the hour is getting close. And what do? You pray. You seek the Lord's face. You cry out for the energy that you have with your declining reserve to get to that place. But here's the prayer I'm praying. I want my dying to be more powerful than my living ever was. And I'm praying that prayer because after Paul the Apostle died, a bunch of people gathered his letters and created the New Testament. After Jesus died, in his lifetime, he probably ministered to tens of thousands, probably. After his resurrection, he has ministered to billions. I'll go with some modern examples of this. D.L. Moody was a great evangelist at the turn of the last century, and he died in 1900. But he founded the Moody Bible Institute. He founded the Moody Press. He established the Moody Bible Church. And now if you want a theological education, you can go to Moody for free because Moody was poor and couldn't get an education. So he set up the Bible Institute so that students who come there don't have to pay tuition. I mean, his effect after his death is more powerful than his personal presence was. I think it's biblical to pray that. So I am praying for my dying to be more effective than my living ever was.
But why wouldn't you pray that? I mean, that
sure. Well, some people get mad at me because they say, "Oh, I'm not going to die," just like you did a minute ago. I don't want to think about that.
My point is that, and I say this in the open of the show, that at one point in time we ask why we're here and what are we here to do. All of us want to leave a legacy. Yeah. All of us want to leave the place a little bit better than what we found it.
That's
and
right.
To have an impact on the people that we have had the pleasure of meeting. Yes. In one way or another. And so why wouldn't you want to, I tell everybody this, die with no regrets.
Better than that, die with a legacy is even better. Not just no regrets. That means you're not going to look back and say, I shouldn't have done that. You want to die saying, I'm glad I did do that.
Exactly.
And I'm glad I set this into motion. And I'm glad that this thing is here so that when I'm gone, this continues. That's a better way to die. Yes.
Yeah. Oh. And if you have that opportunity, and everybody has that opportunity, it's just a matter of picking up a newsletter in somebody else's house when they're changing their shirt and reading it. It was divinely inspired.
Yes.
It was like,
I can't prove
it. Like, David, pick it up, read it, please. That's why we brought it there. Would you?
What are the odds? He should even have opened the letter and set it on the coffee table. I mean, this is crazy.
Oh, David, I've had that happen to me all the time. In my world, it's music. I will be wandering around and I'll have something on my mind and I'll get in my car and I'll turn on the engine and it's a music station is playing and the song that is relevant to what I was thinking about will be playing on the radio to remind me of who I really am and why I'm really here.
Now we're running out of time, so I won't be able to tell you that because that happened to me too.
I'm sure it did. It happens to you all the time. And what? No, actually, we ran out of time some time ago.
Oh, did we?
So what? But I would be interested in having you back. Just don't have as much coffee next time. No, I'm kidding.
Actually, I'm. You should have seen me bounce when I was in my 20s. I bounce a lot less. I bounce less high now. In fact, my nickname was Tigger. Churches that brought me in would call me Tigger. They say he's definitely not Winnie the Pooh, and he's certainly not Eeyore. He's Tigger.
Well, you certainly have a lot of energy, and God bless you. I hope that you have a very, very long life, and congratulations on your son getting married and your wife's healing. And I'm glad that you are someone that lives your life in a positive way.
Well, I'm thankful to be on your podcast too. It's a real pleasure, and I'd be delighted to come back. Just click on the link. Is that what I do?
I'll get that to you.
Okay, sounds good. Well, listen, the Lord bless and may all your listeners have a great day. I hope that all of them feel that this has been helpful to them, and I'd be delighted to be, I'd be delighted to do anything that they would ask me to do. I'd come into their churches or do an event with them, or that's on my website. So are you going to advertise the links to the website? Is that what you do?
Go ahead, do it now.
Okay, well, so my webpage is www.spirit, like Holy Spirit, and equip like equipment. Put those two words together, spiritequip.com. And there you can find links to my social media. You can find blogs that I do. You can see YouTube videos and sermons that I preached and so on. And if you want to invite me to come to your church, you can fill out a form and I can come and fly to your church. I do 3-day events. And are 3-day events based upon, right now, 3 topics. One is the Lord's Prayer and the deep meaning of it. One is healing prayer. And the other is hearing the voice of God. And actually, the hearing the voice of God one is the one I wanted to just go with you, because that thing about you just said about the music in the car, that happened to me, and it sets up my next book. Hey, are you there? It's me, God. How to listen, test, and know when God speaks. But regardless of that, the easiest way to do that is to go to the website, and all the links to all the stuff is there.
I'm glad that you've been here, Dr. David. It's been, as I've enjoyed. I haven't got a word in edgewise, which is just fine. I've enjoyed my time listening to the stories. I think that they're great.
Well, thank you very much.
And it's been my pleasure to have you here. And by the way, go to his website again, which is spiritequip.com.
That's right.
And learn out all about him. And if you want him to come to your church or to your facility or something else for him to talk to the people that can benefit from his message, that would be awesome.
Excellent.
That would be awesome. So I want to thank you again, young man, for being here. And I mean young man because you've got lots and lots of energy, which is one of the things that the good Lord or the spirit guides or whoever values so greatly about you, is because of the energy that you bring to the work.
Well, it's God-given. Both my parents lived into their 90s, and they were tough, strong people. So I think it was not a windy day when the apple fell from the tree.
Thank you, Dr. David. It's been such a pleasure. Have a great day, and we'll have you back. I got a feeling that this episode is going to play well.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin@kmmedia.pro.